My Lords, I've great pleasure in speaking immediately after Lord Mann and other noble lords who have spoken on this topic. I'm delighted that my amendment number 35 has been grouped with this interesting debate, but I will be taking the discussion in a slightly different direction, which just explains my hesitation at leaping in at this point. Nonetheless, I am on my feet, and I am going to speak to amendment number 35, which is in this group in my name. I think some of us, at least, who were here in committee on Monday, began to wonder how much this bill would actually achieve by way of change culturally and in practice. And I say that by way of introduction to my remarks on this amendment, because I come here to the question of how the Equality Act is interpreted in connection with the duty that already exists under the 1986 Act on universities to protect freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Under the Equality Act, all public bodies, I just remind noble lords, have a broad duty to eliminate discrimination, harassment and victimisation, advance equality of opportunity between persons who share a relevant protected characteristic and persons who do not, and foster good relations between persons who share a relevant protected characteristic and persons who do not share it. The 1986 Act also, of course, as I say, has this obligation to protect and advance free speech. But what we have found in recent years is that the Equality Act obligation is frequently being interpreted by universities as a reason for taking steps to impose their views on equality, diversity and inclusion, both on students and in public events. And we have seen, for example, gender-critical feminists being turned away precisely because universities have interpreted their presence to be contrary to their own public sector duty under the Equality Act. Now, Amendment 35 does not excuse universities from their public sector, public body duty under the Equality Act. They remain required to fulfil that broad duty, but it does insert a university-specific balancing requirement, which requires universities also to have regard in interpreting this duty to free speech. It is a balancing amendment that ensures potentially contradictory public law duties do not clash with one another. And it's for that reason that I advance it, but also because, to be honest, my lords, if we do not see something like this happening at various points in the bill, then it is very hard to see how current practice and culture will change at all. So, with that in mind, I recommend Amendment 35, and I hope that the Minister will be able to give wholehearted agreement.
Would the noble lord, if I might, just ask a question of him? He spoke about how he was anxious to have the duties under the Equality Act and duties under freedom of speech promotion sitting alongside each other, but his amendment says have particular regard to the duty of freedom of speech. Does that mean that the duty of freedom of speech would overtake the duties under the Equality Act instead of sitting beside them?
My lords, that is not the intention. The use of the word particular arises because, of course, universities, both as universities and as public bodies more generally, have a range of obligations under the law. And all the wording is intended to do here is to say that that particular obligation needs to be taken into account, because this is a bill that is related to freedom of speech in academic bodies. It isn't intended to give priority, it is to draw attention to and have particular regard to that. But I would be perfectly happy, because in natural language, I mean, this is, of course, legalistic language to some extent. In natural language, one would say to have regard particularly to that, as amongst the other obligations that universities have. But this is how it is expressed in legal language. But I'd like to assure the noble lord that it is not the intention to trump one over the other, but to require a balancing of these existing obligations and to put that on the face of the bill, because at the moment, while it might be said they both exist and it's for the universities to balance them, they are not balancing them in a way that I think satisfies the intentions of this bill.